welcome and say hello to everybody. Glad you're here with us this morning at All Saints Church. If you're new to this community and would like to keep up with many events going on here, there are green contact sheets near both doors. Just please take a minute to give us your contact information. Also, there's a welcome table outside where you can pick up a red welcome bag that has all sorts of information, including a little card that you can give us. And if you're streaming online, everyone turn around and wave to the camera. Hello, everybody's streaming online in many different countries. Yes, Russ, we're all waving at you. Welcome, it's great to have you here. Just a reminder that part of how we keep the lights on here and the heat on, which we need sometimes, is your generosity and your generous giving. And so please, if you haven't made a pledge to All Saints yet, please make a pledge to All Saints. If you're viewing online, there is a little button that says donate, and please click and make a gift and be part of the ministry of All Saints Church, not just in this place, but around the world. At all times, we put our faith into action here at All Saints Church, and each week we focus that action in one specific way. And this week we're writing our members of Congress in support of the people's budget, proposed recently by the Progressive Caucus to the House. And so rather than just react to the regressive and morally bankrupt agenda currently being pursued by the administration and controlling majorities in Congress, the people's budget gives us an opportunity to present an alternative vision for the country's future. It's a vision that we believe is in alignment with All Saints' resolutions on economic and social justice. So you can stop by the action table by the door to sign up to a letter to our senators and sign a letter to your member of the House in support of the people's budget. It is just a joy and an honor to have Maryetta Anschutz here today. I was trying to think of how long we've known each other, and I'm not actually really sure. Yeah, a long time. Maryetta is the founder and head of the Episcopal School of Los Angeles. And I'm going to let her tell the story of how that school came into being and what it is doing. But I am always on the lookout for things that just look like church. And when I say look like church, I mean look like just getting out among the people, because that's where we know Jesus is, and particularly those who are most on the margins. And I love the language of Father Greg Boyle when he talks about when we're all standing on the margins, there are no margins, and creating that beloved community of Christ. And it doesn't always happen in an actual traditional church congregation. There's lots and lots of different ways to be church. And when I came here on one of my first days here, I went over to ESLA and Maryetta showed me around, and I was absolutely blown away. And I just said, you got to come to All Saints and share the story of ESLA. And we've got to start thinking about how we can be involved with this remarkable ministry that is happening right here in our own diocese. And so I'm going to stop talking, and I am going to just introduce and ask you to welcome Reverend Maryetta Anschutz. And so first off, I just wanted to sort of say hi, welcome. And when I came and visited you, you told me a story that sort of started with your experience as a little girl about how you had this idea of starting a school. Unless you wanted to start somewhere else. I was like, I want to make sure you get to that.
I've got a lot of stories. I'm a preacher, so I never know quite what I tell people. I think actually the first time I thought about schools, so I grew up in a, obviously, if you went to the last service, my dad's a priest, we're a churchy bunch. But I grew up in cities where I was, there wasn't a lot of choice about where you go to school. Public schools were really pretty tough, and so my parents sacrificed a lot and sent me to these really wonderful independent schools. And one of those independent schools had me do an internship in Southeast Washington, D.C. It was the John Tyler Elementary School. It was right outside of the Gardens, which used to be the public housing in Southeast D.C., kind of right out of Capitol Hill. And so I was assigned to a kindergarten class, and the class was just, kind of chaotic, 40 kids, 6 years old. And so every Wednesday I would go to John Tyler. And I would leave the pastoral, beautiful school that I went to, and I would go to this very inner city school. So one morning I got into work, and the teacher was kind of annoyed at this little 6-year-old, and it seems the little 6-year-old had this bundle in his pocket, and I mean, the teacher was just ripped, and I kind of didn't know what was going on, and he said, and he pulls the kid in, and he says, "Give me whatever's in your pocket." And he takes out this bundle of cut up pieces of newspaper. And I'm like, what in the world is this guy so uptight about? It's newspaper stuck in a 6-year-old's pocket. Well, so he unrolls the newspaper, and he sees there are a couple hundred pieces of newspaper cut in the shape of dollar bills. And they're all rolled, and wires around them. And I didn't know what that was. And I looked at him, I said, well, what is that? He said, well, he's being tested whether he can run drug money during the day. 6 years old, Southeast DC, about 6 blocks away from the Capitol. And so the teacher, I guess this was a pretty common thing, so the teacher says, take him to the counselor's office, or the principal's office. And so I walk him up the hallway, and I put my hand on his back, because he's really shy and scared and one thing or another, and he kind of recoils, and I think, oh my Lord, what did I do? And I'm 15 at the time, I don't know what's going on. And I said, well, what's wrong? And he gets teary and one thing or another, and I said, well, do you want to show me? And he lifts up his shirt, and he's just been beaten. I mean, just beaten like I've never seen beaten. And so I go into the principal's office, and I show her the wad of cash, and she kind of rolls her eyes, and then I show her the bruises. She sort of rolls her eyes, and I said, well, what are we going to do? And she said, well, there's really not that much we can do. Okay, pardon my French, and I'm sure my mother is watching. I would have been pissed off for so long about that moment in history. So pissed. Because why in the world does a kid need to grow up in a world like that? And how in the world could somebody in a position of authority and leadership say, well, there's not that much we can do? Now, the truth of the matter is there wasn't that much that a school could do at the time. I mean, you send a kid into foster care in a city like Washington in the 80s, and I would say a city like Los Angeles here and now, and there is some question of whether that child will go into a more dangerous environment. So I think the schools were really trapped with what do you do with kids who are truly at risk. So it was kind of those were the first sort of moments where I just kept looking at the world saying, all that I have and all the privilege I have has to be, there has to be a way to share a little bit of this. This is crazy. I mean, this is crazy that this 6-year-old lives this way. So it's kind of haunting. It's a strange thing to say. I spent the rest of my life being pissed off at, Anacostia. But the truth of the matter is sometimes I think when we're at our most effective is when we're really pushing hard to right an injustice. And that, I think, is the first part of the kind of journey.
So what's the second part?
Okay. All right. So the second part, let me give you a little explanation of what I do. So before I came here, I was the associate dean of the Div School at Yale, which sounds really high and mighty. It is not. It basically means running the lives of young people going through the ordination process and coming to seminary. It was a lot of fun. But one of the things that Yale experienced was this real question of a lack of just generations and generations of people that were no longer going into public service. I mean, and this was across the board. I mean, within the law school, the undergrad program, forestry, all of these schools were saying, wait a second, Yale was basically founded to foster a sense of public service, and our people are going to Wall Street over Main Street. What is that all about? What shifted? And so I did a lot of academic work on that question. What is it that draws a young person into public service, and particularly as it related to Yale, how does that play out? What we found, and this is a broad summary, is that historically, really before the Vietnam War, you had generations and generations of what I called, even in the paper, the Lucky Sperm Club, who, went to Yale because they were fortunate enough to be able to pay for Yale and to be a part of the families that had gone to Yale for generations and generations. But they were also parts of families who really said, we'll pay the bill. Go and run for office, go into the ministry, go do good with your life. So that way of that sort of recruiting pool at Yale is changed, which is a good thing. But the school itself, and I would say schools across the board, colleges and universities, are no longer really recruiting along those lines. They're not really saying, we are looking for people who want to spend their life in public service. The cynical side of me, who has to buy property and build endowments in one thing or another, is very aware of why schools shifted. They needed to pay their bills, and so they needed their alum to, go off to Wall Street or Main Street. But anyway, so the backstory of this is that when I looked at the schools that were really forming young people for public service and sending them into Yale historically, they were these small Episcopal schools up and down the East Coast where some chaplain or some English teacher said to a kid, gee, you would make a great priest, or gee, you should really run for office. You've got this, kind of fire in your belly. Formation, a lot of the time, especially in small communities, comes with people being able to make observations about kids and help them discern their way. Sometimes I get cranky with kind of modern culture. Oh, let your children just feel their way through life. Well, actually, they actually like to be encouraged, too. And ideas are sometimes very good for them to chew on. All right, so fast forward. I wanted to build a school that might foster this sense of public service, and I needed to find a place crazy enough to go for the model. A la California. I'm serious. So I thought about doing this I thought about getting the money from New Canaan, Connecticut, where I had a little church, and they were excited about the idea, and doing it in like Stanford or Bridgeport. And if you know the Gold Coast of Connecticut, you could pay the bills on the Gold Coast. But we would not have been able to do the model that we have. I thought about Washington, I thought about Boston, I thought about all these kind of traditional cities, but here's the model. So 30% of our kids live at or below poverty. 30% are affluent, more than affluent. And then there's 40% kind of in the middle. And so it's a really unusual population of kids. The rich don't pay for the poor. In fact, everybody basically is on financial aid. I mean, right now, our life is all about raising money to kind of just keep the thing moving forward until we get large enough that it all kind of rights itself. But it is one of the most unusual models of diversity, of economic and racial diversity you will ever see in a school. There are a lot of people who will say, I'm building a school for just inner city kids, or I'm building a school for primarily wealthy people, but when we can afford it, we're going to let the kids in scholarship in. This is the opposite of both of those things. This is what colleges and universities have been trying to do for the last 50 years, which is making a classroom truly reflect the diversity of this country and this city, which intellectually, forget being a do-gooder. Intellectually, that is actually the most interesting classroom you can build. So that's the sort of summary.
Well, and there really is a phenomenon in independent schools, and my wife has worked in independent schools for several decades, and it's called the Barbel Effect. And it is exactly what you're talking about, which is you have a group of wealthy families that's large, and then you have a group of poorer families for schools that really want to have diversity in them, but you have almost nothing in the middle.
Yeah.
And so what you don't have is so much diversity, but a caste system.
Yeah.
And so talk about, how did you get this off the ground? How did you pick your location? And sort of, so you had this vision, you found a place that was kind of bananas enough to go for it. What happened then?
Well, and I call Los Angeles bananas. Let me just say, I find Los Angeles the most interesting, potentially certainly for science and math and creativity, this is the place you want to be an educator. I mean, if you want to be building a school that has a really rigorous, especially science and math program, because you can trick a kid into liking math by showing them how to design a computer game. I mean, there is nothing better than the sort of arts of particularly Hollywood to integrate that into the program. So, I mean, as much as I sort of have a light heart about California, I will tell you, it is game changing in terms of building and supporting a school. So we got started. I came out here 10 years ago, and I basically started building relationships and looking at the market and trying to figure out, where is the need, what grade, what does this need to really look like? And of course, 2007 comes and 2008 comes, and the world just sort of stops. And people still, what are the people still doing? Depressions, they still go to movies and they still drink. So, the movie industry was still okay. The restaurant and bar industry was still okay in 2007, 2008, but everything else was a disaster. And so I started shopping around trying to raise money in 2007, 8, and people looked at me like I was out of my skull. They look at me less that way, but there's still a little bit of that. So we started with essentially a free STEM program. So those of you who don't know, science, technology, engineering, and math. The idea is, really an integrated curricular approach where you're getting, 6th graders to build robots, blow up rockets. I mean, it's dissect disgusting things. The point of a STEM program is essentially especially in the middle school, is essentially to turn a kid on to science and math. And it's a little bit of a bait and switch because mostly in these project-based experiences, they're learning higher level math, higher level science, but they're having so much fun with the project that they don't know. So watching, when you see a 6th grader build a roller coaster or something, they're doing calculus. I'm not kidding. They basically are doing calculus, but they don't know it. And hopefully, they are inspired enough to hang on through their pursuit of science and math to maintain their energy for calculus by the time they get there. So we started for 3 years with these free and reduced price summer and after-school programs, and they were a blast because nobody was worried about accreditation, whether our curriculum was appropriate, blah, blah, blah. Well, I would go down to there's a very fancy meat market on Hillhurst in Los Feliz McCall's, and I would say, do you have any eyeballs that we can dissect? And they just loved it, just loved it. So it was just after-school summer programs. What 5th grader doesn't want to dissect an eyeball? And I would hire all these young kids right out of college who didn't know a thing about a classroom, but you'd have one college grad to every 4 kids, and it was fine. And again, you were blowing rockets up, so it really wasn't. It wasn't a traditional classroom. And then what we found our kind of rhythm, and we found where we wanted to be, and wanted to be was Hollywood. For a lot of reasons. There are no independent high schools in Hollywood. It is in the middle of everywhere. If you're going to go to the Valley, you have to pass us to one of these schools. There's a real lack of schools, especially for boys in Los Angeles of choice. So there are a million reasons why Hollywood is particularly interesting. But for us, it's not the rich and it's not the poor. It is really kind of the middle ground. Hollywood in the last 10 years is rapidly, I think I've struggled with the gentrification of Hollywood, but it has really developed. And for us, it has really developed in terms of public transportation and all of the kind of resources. So we love Hollywood. We are at Santa Monica and Vine Street. And in our first year, once we kind of decided what we were going to do, which was this 6th through 12th grade school, we said, all right, now we need a home. And I went around town and I tried to raise money for a building, and people looked at me again. It's 2007, 2008, like I was absolutely crazy. And we were just kind of coming back from the recession in 2009, 2010. we found our first building, and I went around to all these people that I wanted to make donors, and I said, well, don't give me $1 million, lend me $1 million, and I'll pay you back. It was great. Nobody was ready to give anything to us at that point. So we had all these people lend us money. We bought our first building. I'll tell you the story of the first building. It was built in 1922. It was the first den of ill repute in Hollywood. It was, the kids love that. In the 40s, it was Victor Fleming's movie studio, so it's got like good Hollywood history. And right now, it's sort of, as we've renovated, it looks like a tech company more than a school. It's really cool. So anyway, so we've landed in Hollywood. I did pay them back, which is miraculous. Some of them forgave the loan, which was even more miraculous. Thank God. So that was kind of how we got off the ground.
That's fantastic. So why an Episcopal school?
Right. Good question. So I'm a bad priest. I mean, I just took off my collar after. I had it on for an hour, and I swear I was breaking out in hives. So part of being in Los Angeles, everything we do is kind of counterculture in terms of being an Episcopal school. Most of our population, I mean, we have maybe 2 real Episcopalians, whatever that means, in the school. Most of my faculty are basically very respectful atheists. They're 20s, 30s, really highly educated, and they're in that space. I promise you, when they start having babies, that's going to change. But whatever, giving them time. So what I needed to do just for my own life, and I think for the kind of central piece of this school, is I needed to give our kids a sense of place and purpose, because when you have that kind of diversity and when you have the sort of newness, you need tradition. You need rhythm. Has anybody read the David Brooks article about thin communities and thick communities? Well, we're a thick community in every possible way. And one of the things about having a church tradition is it allows you to have a lot of things that you're kind of building into your traditions and your kind of rhythm of life. We also have a huge mission to our neighborhood in Hollywood. So we unapologetically do not close our gate or lock our doors. We have tons of people on duty all the time, but we are very much living in the city, whereas most schools, raising money to build gates and guarded communities, we are very much out there. We don't ask our children to, do the kind of work we do with the homeless in our neighborhood, but they observe it and they see it, and I think they're changed. And so, we are decidedly urban and sort of social justice focused, and that in terms of the Episcopal tradition is, I think, the best manifestation of the way we live church. We also have chapel. Okay, so we have chapel 3 times a week. It's about 22 minutes, and the kids preach and the teachers preach. And I actually have chapel books, but not enough for this crowd. I can send you a chapel book if you send me an email. But our chapel is amazing, because you'd think, okay, 6th through 12th grade, teenagers don't like chapel. I hated chapel. It was ridiculous. Our chapel is so good, and our kids like it. And they're not, they're weird kids across the board. They're all weird, and we love them for it. But they, in their kind of crazy way, sort of are incredibly respectful to one another as they all offer their chapel talks. So it's really quite sweet. The chapel talks are, the art teacher will talk about her first love and kind of how it relates to growing up, or the 6th grader will talk about his struggle with some early illness, and it's really quite miraculous. They're awful at singing the hymns, and that's hysterical, because I just kind of roll my eyes. They have a couple of hymns that they will actually sing, but otherwise the chapel piece of it is sort of unapologetic, and they've completely bought into it. And that's, I think, the great lesson. When you look at most Episcopal schools in the world, they spend most of the time kind of apologizing about it being an Episcopal school. We are Episcopal on steroids. I think there are like 5 priests on staff, which is kind of freaks me out.
Yep.
But it works when you don't apologize. It really, really works.
Well, and I want to second. I mean, I grew up, and part of why I'm not only just a priest today, but an Episcopalian, or even going to church at all, is I went to a K through 8 Episcopal school, St. Michael and All Angels in Tucson, and that was unapologetically Episcopalian. And I mean, the headmaster used to pull us out of class to go picketing, and there was a big sign in front of the church that said it's a sin to build a nuclear weapon, and
that's where you got it.
And that's well, it is. It's exactly where I got it.
Yeah.
And it shaped me for the rest of my life. And so I think it's part of the reason I resonate so much with this. Can you tell us a few stories of some of the kids that have come through and sort of maybe moments of joy and challenge that you've had?
Yeah, I mean, I'm always conscious when I'm being taped because my kids, I mean,
protect identities in sort of whatever way you need to.
These are all your kids up here? Yeah. So let me tell you about college. This is wild. This is our first year of applying kids to college. And of course, I'm ahead of school. I'm a little anxious about the college process. We did not know what we were getting ourselves into. We have 10 kids in this first graduating class, and they are all over the board. And if they're watching, you're all over the board. And they had a real mix of interest and achievement level and skill. And every one of them is now into their top 1 or 2 colleges. Of the 10 together, they have $847,000 in need and merit aid. I mean, it's just just insane how much kind of money they got in the process. So back that up, and I'll tell you about one of my. She knows that she's my favorite, but one of my favorites, Evylyn Lopez. So Evylyn is the oldest daughter of 5. Mom is a clerk at the Rite Aid, probably the greatest mom I've ever known, and in some extraordinary way balances 5 kids, and they're all kind of wild and wonderful. So Evylyn came to us in 8th grade without huge academic background. We took a risk on Evylyn, she took a risk on us. Evylyn was the kind of kid who every day after school would seek out her teachers, would push hard. She's a little bit of a stress case sometimes. She's didn't always sort of have confidence in herself and her academic life. And she's basically raising her younger siblings. So Evylyn gets to the college process, and our kids have never seen this thing happen before, so they have no idea what to do. And Evylyn determines that she wants to go to Kenyon College, and Kenyon is this small liberal arts college in the middle of Ohio. I think it's ranked like 24. It's a really, really good competitive school. And so without really any pause, she applies. She gets in, she goes to the recruitment weekend, she meets the president of the college, she comes home, she immediately writes him this lovely thank you note that would have just brought me to my knees. And she's kind of off to Kenyon College, full ride plus all the money to come back and forth and books and all of that stuff. So when she goes to this is so Evylyn. She goes to the weekend, shoved some money in her pocket, and I was like, go buy yourself a sweatshirt and, have fun. And I'm thinking, I'm not going to say go buy beer, but, you're going on your college visit and whatever's going to happen. I just wanted her to have some cash. So she comes back, and she comes into my office, and she says, Miss A, I have a present for you. Well, what does this kid do with all the money I gave her? She doesn't buy herself anything. She buys all of her teachers Kenyon mugs. And I thought, for me, widow's mite, whatever you want to call it, but a kid like that is going to change the world. She didn't buy herself stuff. She bought everybody else stuff. There aren't many kids like that in the world. And that's the kind of kid we're producing.
That's fantastic. Yeah. I'm going to draft a vestry member. Brian, can you help us out for a second? You grab a microphone there, and we'll see if we have any, have a few more minutes, see if we have any questions from folks who are here. And Brian can play Phil Donahue.
Is this on?
Yeah. Is it? Yeah.
I have two
Can you
questions.
say your name?
Bob Carlson. I have two questions. They're not totally unrelated. One is admission and how you select what the criteria is and the extent to which they have to demonstrate the ability to perform and so forth. The second one is really is more asking you your thoughts on, I'm concerned about public schools and the independent schools and the charters and the vouchers and Secretary DeVos and all. And in this process, the public schools get shortchanged. That's where the majority of us are being educated.
Absolutely.
And I'm interested in your thoughts and whether or not your school in any way is doing something that is beneficial.
Really, really good two questions. So the first is that we have a pretty standard independent school admissions process, but we do something unusual. So the anybody who's had a kid go through the independent school admissions knows the ISEE test, which are, most private schools are preparing kids for several years to take the ISEEs. We offer a free ISEE tutoring program for basically the 6 months before the test to anyone who wants to go. So if you're in a public school and you're not a part of that ISEE culture, we essentially pay for your tutoring. I will say at the other end, and this is just a little bit of an aside, for our juniors and seniors, the disparity, the achievement gap in this country is about access to kind of high-end, especially around test scores, high-end tutors. So what we did with ours, and this is very Machiavellian of me, but I wanted to make sure that our wealthy kids didn't go out and spend $200 an hour on tutors and leave our poor kids behind. So we as a school pay for Compass testing service, which is like the fancy Harvard, Westlake, Poly, testing service. They come in and they tutor all of our kids. It's because in 20 years, I want to be able to prove it doesn't matter how much money you have. If they all have access, they can all achieve. Okay, so we've tried to be really creative about leveling that playing ground. Let me talk about the public school piece though. One of the reasons that I am here, probably the primary reason, is that 35 years ago this public school system was the best in the country, and today it is behind Mississippi and Alabama. And I love the South, but that is saying a lot. And we have to do something about that. So what our goal is to kind of create a larger network of after-school programs. So this is gonna make me sound a little cynical, but I have spent a lot of time dealing with LAUSD and the larger public school system, and I don't feel like I have the capacity to break and transform that personally. But I'll tell you what I do have the capacity to do, after school. I can do after-school AP tests. I can do after-school tutoring. I can do after-school serious engineering programs. And so what we have in our kind of master plan is to rebuild our original STEM program that actually kind of was the feeder to the school and offer that on campuses all over LA. We have a place in Compton where we're building one. We have a place in Santa Monica, which is a little weird, where we're building something like that. But what we're trying to do is essentially, as we grow, also build programs that will be available to primarily middle and high school kids, where in the afternoon they can go if they really want to engage in serious after-school programs. When you look at LA in terms of the after-school programs we have right now, it's All Stars and a couple of different kind of major organizations that frankly the schools and the unions have let in, but they don't have a lot of really good curricular work going on, and that's what needs to happen, and that's what needs to change. So I think one of the problems with private schools is the scaling model is so limited, but what we can do is we can open our door a little wider with our resources. Yeah, so.
We have back here. Could you stand and say your name?
Lynn J. Did you receive any sort of assistance from the diocese, either financial or otherwise? Thank you. I thought that would bring a laugh.
Great question.
No. And so I'm from the Diocese of Virginia, and the Diocese of Virginia has like 1 million Episcopal schools, and there are moments Serena Beeks, who runs the schools in LA, is a saint, and is the most extraordinary human being we have in the diocese. And if anybody's involved in the diocese, go find Serena Beeks and figure out how she can get more support. But no, there is no.
So I'm going to ask a follow-up to that, which is we're Episcopalians in the Diocese of Los Angeles. This school is our school. How can the people in this room, how can we as a congregation support this mission?
Yeah. In a lot of different ways, but I'll talk turkey with you. This is an expensive operation. The kingdom of God it does actually have a price tag on it at times when it comes to running an institution, and yet it's not just about sort of giving in a faceless way. When we get people involved with kids like Evylyn Lopez. And so I was just talking to the person who's sponsored her scholarship, and I was telling her about the Kenyon College mug. And of course, this is a woman who lost her husband last year and has kids that are out of the home, and she doesn't, all of her kids are on the East Coast. And, Evylyn is really an important piece of her life. Evylyn doesn't know the person who sponsors her scholarship, because we're really careful about that kind of thing. We want scholarships to be very empowering and not paternal, which sometimes happens in schools. But I will tell you, having somebody support a child from afar and come onto campus and observe her and see her grow is a game-changing thing for everyone. Another thing that people can always do if you're involved in the city of Los Angeles, I always have issues with the city of Los Angeles. I mean, ADA ramps or elevators or one thing or another. You never know who knows, the right people. So some of this is also about influence. And then finally, we have kids who, so when I grew up, I was exposed to every kind of resource in the world. So I could call the next door neighbor and say, can I have an internship? Can I come work for you? Well, most kids in this country don't have that kind of access. And our whole mission is really to give a child access. So access to an internship at SpaceX, access to JPL, access to, a bank, access to, other things that they've never seen. Access is really important, and access changes people. Yeah.
That's great. We're at time, but I also want to make sure, Marianne, you got a chance to ask something, because I bet this will be good.
So I'm Marianne Ryan, and I work at the Gooden School, which is an independent Episcopal school in Sierra Madre. So if you're interested in having your child attend a wonderful Episcopal school before they go to Episcopal
Amen.
School of Los
Amen.
Angeles, come talk to me. But I think one of the beauties first of all, coming to Los Angeles and starting a school was probably one of the bravest things anybody could do in this saturated environment. But I think the beauty of Episcopal schools is that every child is known for the individual that they are. And it sounds like, and I know you are doing such a wonderful job at that. So congratulations on your many successes.
Right. And just really bluntly, how can people give?
Giving, you can go online. So you can go online, and our website is es-la.com. There is a donate now obvious button. There's also, frankly, opportunities to come and just sit with me. Oh my gosh, there's Emily Knuckles. Actually, I didn't even know she was coming. Emily's actually our development coordinator back there. I sent her an email last night. I was like, Emily, I'm going over to Pasadena.
Stand up, Emily.
Yeah. So anyway, find Emily. And I have actually a bag, and I'll give it to Emily, with my card, a couple of chapel books. I think I brought some pledge cards. I'm shameless. We also have, some fun, kitschy stuff in the bag. I'll give to Emily.
Oh, great. Can we show Maryetta our thanks?
Wait, I have one more thing.
Hold on. She's got one more thing.
So, one more thing. So, this Mike Kinman you have.
No.
Let me just say, most people are really funny about kind of guarding their little communities, and that's never been a way, in my eyes, to build the kingdom. I've known Mike for a long time. My father and I are kind of in awe of Mike and his preaching gifts and all of that. But Mike came over, and his immediate thing was, how can I help? What can I do? How can I open my community to you? And it was the most generous gesture any priest has ever made to me in the church. He is the guy you want in a war. He is the most humble creature. I mean, because there's not a lot of humility in the Episcopal Church. I'm not sure if you've noticed that. He is so humble and gracious. So I just want to say thank you to you all because you've brought us truly one of the great disciples, and I am grateful that I get to learn from him.
Thank you.
So.
Thank you. And I'm excited about a potential relationship between All Saints and ESLA because you are out there doing stuff which we've been doing around here, but I just think like there's so much commonality in our missions, and we can only be stronger together. So I got to get you off so you can preach 11:15. Thank you all so much.